Welcome to our second episode of Raising the Bar. That's right, the DOHS, Strength and Conditioning, Functional Fitness, Weights, Lifting, Gym, Physical Education podcast that we doing for you guys on C Days. I'm Coach Burgess, and here is Coach Warner for your listening pleasure.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Getting ready to talk a little bit about flexibility today. Let's just get right to it. Let's jump in.
All right. What do you remember about old thinking of stretching? When you were in PE class back in the day, what was stretching like for you guys?
I kind of relate it back to what PE looked like when we were younger, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can even remember in elementary school, we do our little jumping jacks, and then we do a series of just static stretches, right? I mean, that's what I remember about getting ready, for PE or for physical activity when I was younger, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that old thinking has kind of gone away.
Yeah.
Right? Just as in order to do great performance, you need to do static stretches and get your muscles ready.
Yeah.
But now they've kind of learned that static stretching has a role, active stretching has a different role.
Yeah.
And dynamic stretching is really your best friend, like pre-performance. You know what I'm saying? What do you think about people used to think that stretching makes you perform better and it decreases injuries?
I think some people still really think that, which I feel like it's nice for us to have these conversations, because I feel like it's important for just our kids in school and PE classes and weights classes and functional fitness, but also for our athletes, because, you take a track kid that's maybe a high jumper, and hopefully what we can help them learn is that stretching prior to their event is not going to help them. As a matter of fact, it might actually hinder their performance, when it comes to, or even basketball players, we're talking about them jumping up to get rebounds. We're talking about volleyball players who are going up and taking a hitting approach. When we're talking about those sports that are super explosive, those static stretches might actually hinder their performance, because we're elongating those muscles and we're not keeping those muscles taut and getting ready for the kind of explosive motion that they need to be prepared to in order to perform well. We want those muscles to be warmed up. We don't want them necessarily to be, nice and elongated and relaxed and stretched out, because we need them to do a specific kind of work.
And I the way that you described that was so articulate. Like, it depends on what sport you're playing.
Yeah.
And a person like you said, like a track like Usain Bolt or something like that, he doesn't need his muscles to be long and flexible. He needs those suckers, like the perfect word, taut, so that he can get that energy like every single step and have that energy kind of flow through him like a coil in a spring. He doesn't need that spring all out there like that. He needs to be able to, like tight suspension in a car or whatever.
Right. There's a physics word. It's like, I'm trying to remember it right now, but it's like the idea of stored energy that's getting ready to like release. I don't know. It'll come to me.
Potential energy.
There you go.
Potential energy, kinetic energy.
Tapping into your physics knowledge.
I did graduate from high school.
I'm impressed. That was very deep down in there. I had to brush off the cobweb. That's what I feel like when I think of those muscles that we need to be tight and ready to do explosive work. Is like we need them to have like stored potential energy. And when we're stretching like that, doing those held static stretches before events like that, they kind of lose their potential energy in a sense.
Yeah. And then when we polled students last week about stretching, quite a few of them said that they thought that they stretched for the purpose of preventing injury. I don't know if you remember that or not. They stretch for the purpose of preventing injury.
Right.
And I think that's an idea that is taught to them early And it's one of those things that you do it for this reason, although the research says this reason isn't even true. So we want to expose the kid to this research so that you can say, like, look, you're more than welcome to stretch before a workout. Obviously, you do what you want to do. You're more than welcome to stretch. But if you only have 10 minutes, your 10 minutes should probably be invested in the best 10 minutes for your workout.
Yeah.
And not think, well, I got to prevent injury, because that ain't doing it.
Yeah.
That, touching your toes for 30 seconds is not going to prevent your injury. You'd be better off doing the Frankenstein kicks or whatever, something like that to prepare your muscles.
I think too that we could perhaps do a little bit better job too, because when we had that flexibility presentation last week, when we talk about being loose and being flexible, we're just talking also about just in general life setting, right?
Yes.
I threw out that phrase, whatever doesn't bend and whatever's not flexible will break. That's more or less like when we're talking in everyday life. You need to have some sort or some quantity of flexibility, because when you get to be 43 years old like Warner and you bend over to pick a 40-pound kid up and you're like, oh, my back, you know what I mean? Or my hamstring, like that's what we mean is, you need to have some quantity of flexibility in order to maintain function. But when we're talking about athletic events, dynamic stretching obviously is far more important in terms of warming up, in terms of a warm-up. Yeah.
So let's put that disclaimer out there for the kids. It's specifically what we're talking about. We will do our best to differentiate between stretching is important for life.
Yes.
Stretching is important after a workout. Stretching to prevent injury before a workout is not true. It's not what we're talking about. And that is a myth that we're trying to bust here today. That's what we're talking about. Right? Because stretching does feel good. And there's a reason why it feels good, because it's good for your body. Your body craves some stiffness or whatever. Matter of fact, in a research study that I read in my research for today, they had 8 males stretch twice a day for 7 days. And what they found that not only the muscles, but the tendons between in the joints of those athletes were significantly more compliant, more more like softer, able to move more well lubricated. They were significantly more compliant. And that was just after 7 days. So, stretching definitely has its benefits in quality of life beyond just that.
Yeah. There's definitely value. I mean, because we know obviously that as we get tighter, because we're neglecting those kinds of stretches, we lose function. And of course, that's not what we want ever. But we just want to be careful that we understand, like you had said or stated earlier, that we want to be careful of understanding that certain types of stretches are more beneficial for certain things, and static stretches are not beneficial in order to prevent injury prior to physical activity or physical events. Yeah.
What is static stretching really good for, Coach?
Static stretching really is mostly good in terms of, post-body workouts, making sure that it does help us elongate those muscles and relax those muscles. It also just does a world of good in terms of keeping our muscles loose, preventing injury in terms of, because I had said before, whatever is tight will tend to be strained if we take it through a range of motion it's not used to anymore. So there is value in static stretching after a workout, just to help make sure we're keeping our muscles loose and supple and relaxed. It's also really good just for relaxation and making sure that we're just staying pliable and making sure that we don't lose function.
I'm glad you bring that up, because you mentioned relaxation, right? And staying pliable. Like, I would say probably in my lifetime, well, not probably, certainly in my lifetime, past 10 years, yoga has become so popular. Like yoga studios everywhere. YouTube videos of yoga everywhere.
Yeah.
And although it's not exactly static stretching, there's definitely some active components to it.
Yeah.
There is a lot of get this stretch and hold it. You know what I'm saying? Hold it.
Yeah.
And then there's that the aspect of elongating your muscles, holding it, but there's also the mental component as well, where you get uncomfortable, but you kind of have to stay there to get used to the discomfort. Yeah. My sister's a big yogi. She's like taking classes. She's been doing this like 3 or 4 years. So when I talk to her about like, but it hurts, and she's like, yes, you're supposed to lean into the discomfort so that you can. She's like, it's just like when a workout hurts. You know, when you don't let that stop you. I'm like, yeah, but stretching just feels different, man.
But I just feel like yoga really lends itself nicely to make sure that we maintain function. I feel like the static stretches always come back to maintaining function in real life. And really, that's probably what they're most useful for, right? Because we don't want to lose that function.
So one of the things that I saw, like when I saw this research about soccer players, right? So talk about hamstrings and muscles and things like that. They took like 187, I think it was, soccer players, and they measured legs, width, girth, knees, imbalances between the legs, and they pretty much separate them into two categories. These soccer players had some knee pain. These soccer players didn't have knee pain. And the only thing they found to be the difference between the two was flexibility in the hamstring quadricep area, holding that kneecap. You know what I mean?
That stuff is so interesting to me. How all of those, I threw it in the chat in our last class. All those little like tiny little ticky-tacky differences in one muscle or in an imbalance between two opposing muscles really kind of set us up for lots of problems in different places other than the exact location where the problem takes place, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I really buy into that whole body thing, you know, like all of it is related somehow and all of it will affect something else. If not now, somewhere down the road. And so I think we just really need to do a great job of teaching our kids to try and you know, to balance muscle growth, obviously, and equally as important as muscle growth is maintaining flexibility in those joints. But because it just all obviously is interconnected and it'll catch up with you sooner or later, if not when you're, you know,
absolutely.
If not now, when you're our age.
Bro, I had never even done a deadlift until I was like 27.
Yeah,
28.
I was probably the same, like a little bit younger. And so, and that's college football. They didn't have you do any of those?
Our college football at the time, we didn't even have a strength and conditioning coach or anything like that. So it was just kind of like, go lift.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is before like the internet or like in the baby stages of the internet, I guess. It was like, whatever you found is the program you found, and always kind of like, you know, it's either something like everything is 3 sets of 10 or you're going to do 7 sets of 70. I remember for a good 3 months, I was on a program where I was doing 10 sets of 10 dumbbell bench press superset with pull-ups, 10 sets of 10. Yeah. And I mean, I walked around like this, but I'm also a wide receiver. So like I couldn't get full extension on my shoulders and stuff like that, you know? So just learn through trial and error. I can only imagine the amount, because whenever I would start running, my knees would hurt. Not my knees, multiple, one knee would hurt. And I did realize that was because hamstring strength was not there. Yeah. And I was a super, you know, lunger, quadricep squatter, you know, I was so quad dominant that my knees would pay the price for that. I don't get that anymore. And literally, occasionally I do, and it's gone 2 days because I know what to do. I know what to do from there.
Yeah.
When you think about flexibility, And the kids that are listening to this right now and our life and stuff like that, they're sitting all day. They're sitting all day. How does that affect their overall health or their flexibility? What do you think?
For sure, I think we're all losing flexibility. You and I, as we sit here throughout the day too, are losing flexibility, right? Especially with our legs bent under us like we are right now. That's doing a number on our hamstrings. Like I had shared, the example of my mom and my sister being in a wheelchair. Their hamstrings are so tight because they are sitting in that same position all day long. Hamstrings and calf stretches are probably one of the most valuable stretches to us all right now. We're all sitting in this same position right now. And, again, we talked about it last hour. Somebody had asked in the chat, well, how do you get lower back pain just from tight hamstrings? And it's because that whole posterior chain of muscles on our backside is just so interconnected and affects each other. And so anytime you have, tightness in the hamstrings, it's going to affect your lower back. Tightness in the hamstrings is going to, pull on our calves as well. And so the whole backside of our body really is affected by any, kind of tightness anywhere. You learn to compensate for it. You learn to walk weird. You learn to sit weird in order to compensate for things that we can't do or things that might be uncomfortable. And then when we compensate in our weird ways, we create some other imbalance. And so it becomes kind of this domino effect where we're just kind of causing or creating one problem after another, instead of just starting with where the problem began, because maybe we just don't even realize it yet, right?
Right.
And making sure that we're stretching like we should be. I kind of think like, physical therapists nowadays, they get all of that. They understand completely how all of that is interconnected. And I'm like, man, these people are underpaid. These people, like putting this information out there more often or more loudly for the world to see or hear.
Yeah.
It's just so valuable. Anybody that's gone to physical therapy knows the kinds of things that they say. Oh, this is causing this kind of pain, and this is causing that kind of pain.
And so, working on my personal trainer's license, there's a whole section of compensations. There's a whole section of the study of like, mostly they pretty much have you do one movement. There's like 3 at once, but they're pretty much the overhead squat. They just have you put your hands up and squat. And from there, there's like 5 or 6 different compensations that can happen just with the lower body and 5 or 6 with the upper body. And everyone will tell you, well, this muscle is too tight. This muscle is not tight enough. This one needs more flexibility. This one does not. This person is weak. And if the knees are caving in, it's because the glute muscles aren't firing, which would keep the knees straight, stuff like that. So you got to learn to memorize those. And one thing to remember, kids, is that where it hurts doesn't mean that's where the problem is. That's what Coach Warner is saying. Right. So if your lower back is hurting and you're laying on your back doing scorpion stretches, that will make it feel better for a little bit. That will probably temporarily relieve the pain, but that is not where the problem lies.
Stems.
And it's the reason why in the presentations, I have to try to point out the joints that are connected to the muscles. Muscles are just connectors of joints. And so and then to even take it to the next level, every joint is an alternate function. So ankles are mobility. No, let me make sure I get this right. Ankles are stability joints. They need to be stable. No, they need to be mobile. Knees are stability. Hips are mobility. Lower back is stability. Shoulders are mobility. And the neck needs to be stable. So like it just alternates back and forth, stable, mobile, stable, mobile. And your lower back, if that hurts, then something is not mobile enough right below it. That's pretty much how you kind of like self-diagnose a little bit. Yeah. It's worked for me.
Definitely all interesting.
And the last thing I'll say before we get ready to go is if you don't have a foam roller, get one. All those things that old heads said about stretching, that's true about foam rolling. Like that's what you need. You need to be foam rolling, getting those muscles worked out, getting the little knots worked out so that your muscles can operate smoothly and cleanly pre-workout, post-workout, the whole 9. If you can do that, you will, if you do that consistently, you will find your quality of life will greatly improve, and so will your performance.
Loosen the fascia a little bit, makes everything a little bit more mobile.
Yeah, that's right. So find some YouTube videos on foam rolling and follow those along, and then kind of just add that to one of your weapons in the journey. Well, Coach, we are here at the end of our second episode. That's right. Did we talk about flexibility or did we stretch the truth? Right. Thank you guys for tuning in. There will be a quiz on this in the module. You'll only know that if you stuck around to the end. That's correct. All righty. I'm actually going to press stop this time.
All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right. Take care, y'all.